Well, let's continue with the build-up to the Zimbabwean elections. For more on that particular story, I'm joined by human rights lawyer, Mr. Nqobizitha Mlilo. Mr. Mlilo, great to have you with us as well. Let's just pick up on what that radio presenter had to say about this as well. Is Zimbabwe ready for elections? It's just a few days away.
Well, absolutely not. But what is of importance is to understand that elections in Zimbabwe have long ceased to be a currency of political transaction in Zim. To assume that elections in Zimbabwe, particularly these current coming elections, will be the solution to the political questions in Zimbabwe, I think is wishful thinking.
Why is that?
Because Zimbabweans have voted since at least 2000. You can have elections in Zimbabwe every single day. You're going to get exactly the same result. But what we are not going to get is a transfer of power. Statistically, it is quite evident who is going to win the elections. But the question that confronts Zimbabwe is whether or not the statistical result from the vote can be translated into political fact. In other words, whoever wins the election will be able to attain power. So in other words, the real question in Zimbabwe's politics is a transfer of power, not elections. You can have elections in Zimbabwe every day. You're going to get exactly the same result, but you're not going to answer the real political question that confronts Zimbabwe.
So as you say, the transfer of power is the biggest issue. There have been talks in the past between the ruling party and the opposition party as well. Does that come to fruition? Do the two parties actually talk to each other, or is that just window dressing?
Look, political parties and political players exist for the sake of attaining power. So you can negotiate and talk to the extent it promises that both parties will have something. And I think that course has run its course in Zim. I cannot imagine a situation where ZANU-PF will willingly hand over power to the MDC. I cannot see that happening at all, which is why I come back to the question that to the issue I'm raising, that what should be of concern now to both Zimbabweans and people outside Zimbabwe is how is the MDC going to react to a stolen election? And how is the region and the continent in particular? I don't want to talk about the West, because this is a question that must be resolved by Africa through SADC and the AU. So the question is, how is the MDC going to respond to a stolen election, and how is the AU and SADC going to respond to a contested election? There's no doubt in my mind that this election will bring a result which is contested.
Well, I can imagine then that those who are members of the opposition party will say that this is going to be a stolen election. Are you saying that there's no trust within SADC and the AU to ensure that it's not a stolen election? Are you saying it's not free and fair, it's not transparent, and there is corruption? What proof do you have of this? I think that's the question I'm getting to.
It's not possible to have a free and fair election in Zim under the current conditions. SADC had requested an extension to the dates. In diplomatic language, that's the loudest you can say. You can say in saying that the conditions are not ready for an election. I cannot imagine a situation where ZANU-PF, a liberation movement, which brought Zimbabwe to where it is through the barrel of the gun, can accept a post-independence scenario where power transfers through an election.
Does ZANU-PF care what the AU and SADC actually say?
They may posture that they don't care, but they have to, because the question of legitimacy will always remain a central question. The runoff election in the previous election, the runoff election between Mr. Morgan Tsvangirai and Mr. Mugabe, they could not continue on the path they were, because they needed the legitimacy of SADC and they needed the legitimacy of the AU. So to assume that Zimbabwe can take a bravado route and proceed as oblivious of the existence of SADC and the AU, I think it doesn't make sense. SADC and AU are not the Commonwealth.
As a human rights lawyer, Mr. Mlilo, I can imagine only then that the biggest concern, apart from legitimacy, transparency and fairness, is the situation on the ground. You and I are well aware of what happens when there are unhappy Zimbabweans with the unhappiness regarding the outcome of the elections. There is violence. There has been violence. Are you concerned there's going to be more attacks, more reprisal attacks in the way that we've seen in the past, even Mr. Tsvangirai himself being a victim of this? Are you concerned it's going to deteriorate to that situation again?
Well, violence has become a common denominator in Zimbabwe's politics.
That's a sad part, though, isn't it?
That's the reality of, which is why I come back to the issue that elections cannot be an answer to Zimbabwe's problems. It is inevitable that some form of violence is going to be there, but I would imagine that the violence is not going to be the same as the violence we've witnessed in the past. The rigging or the political contestation around the election will be more sophisticated than what we've seen in the past. It's not going to be as crude as it was in March 2008. Certainly, it is going to carry there's going to be an attempt to create a veneer of legitimacy of the results that are going to come out of this election. But I can tell you now, these elections are not going to answer the real question that faces Zimbabwe.
And I think a lot of people are hoping that veneer is strong enough not to get through to the core and the nerve of the problem. Mr. Mlilo, a huge pleasure to have you with us today.
News that moves. eNCA.com.